So we're here to talk about the recent decision by an independent advisory committee to the FDA regarding MDMA-assisted therapy for PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, I think a lot of people were shocked when the committee recommended against approval. As we heard in the intro, this isn't the final decision, but I think it was a shock to a lot of people. I just want to ask you right away, as someone who is not involved in the American system, you're coming from Germany, from the European system, but working in the same field, working towards the same goals of bringing psychedelics to a medical framework, to an approval framework. What was your reaction when you heard that news? Was it a surprise? Did you have some inclination that maybe it wasn't going to be as easy as maybe some of the reports were making it sound?
Yeah, a very good question. So it was a surprise. It was also a little bit of a shock, but not unexpected. So we, among the networks that we work in, we're talking about particularly a European perspective. So, and the European perspective was, would the data that the FDA accepts or does not accept be enough to also bring it to Europe? And I heard a lot of voices around us that said, well, the studies are too small, and the data that that MAPS or Lykos is delivering might not be good enough, and we are not sure if the reporting on SAEs and AEs how it will be. So it was like people are hoping for an MDMA approval, but also hoping for something that is sound enough to also take it to Europe.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So a lot of the reaction that I was reading, and maybe it's a skewed perspective, I don't know, this is why I'd like to ask you, was that a lot of the critiques from the committee weren't necessarily about the compound itself. There was some safety and long-term safety issues raised, but it was more about maybe the methodology or, some laxness in the way that some of the data was recorded by the company Lykos itself. Is that a perspective that you got? Is that something you can agree with, or how did you view some of the decisions?
Let me give a little bit of context for the listeners. So we are just through a massive psilocybin research project, and it was really a heavy thing to adhere to all the rules that we have given ourselves. And also we have failed in some cases. So managing a team in 2 study centers on our side and study centers that were doing it for the first time, that's really a challenge. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Now, MAPS had a lot more study centers. And MAPS has not been a drug development company before they entered into that race. Neither have we, while our principal investigator is very experienced in more than 30 studies. So it was to be expected that some irregularities would pop up. And of course, as the front runner in the psychedelic space, it would be very good if MAPS would take care of particularly the risk data to be really sound. And I don't know what the FDA will be coming up with. There is a chance of it being approved still, but there could also be a chance of them demanding a clearer registry, a clearer way of dealing with some of the unexpected or unwished events. So I don't know if you want to talk about that too. Obviously, there were some events happening that are not formally to be reported to the FDA. Mm-hmm. But we had conversations over here. Would we report something that happens like 5 months after the study formally ended and it is closely linked to the study? Would we report that? And so the vast majority of voices that I hear said we should, particularly in a situation where we as researchers, drug developers, are to show to society, and society is a pretty complex thing. It does not only exist out of psychedelic enthusiasts. Mm-hmm. So we have to deal with a lot of the conservative people in the systems now. Yeah. And the best way from our viewpoint to deal with skepticism is to be truthful, very open, a little bit more, a little bit more maybe looking at the risks than you consider necessary, because you don't want to hear the voices that tell you, oh, you were hiding something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's really about being maybe overcautious, in your opinion, to sort of, when you have such, I don't know, let's say scrutiny is maybe the right word, but I think it's on both sides, right? Like there's a real enthusiasm, but there's also still this sort of stigma and skepticism of this kind of these compounds, really. And I think that's what you're speaking to. Maybe we could give a little bit of context for the audience on this. About just a couple of the specific things, because the one that stood out to me was not reporting like overly positive feelings. So feelings of euphoria, or I can't remember some of the other terms they use, but these outcomes, normally we think about reporting the adverse outcomes. So, hypertension, or feeling stressed or feeling anxious, scared, these kind of things. And yes, that speaks logically, that's something we should record. But one of the criticisms was not recording the overly positive side effects, let's say, or outcomes, and the idea being that this
which
would
speaks to the mind, which speaks to the mind of addiction researchers, for example.
Right. Yeah.
They are obviously concerned about what are people doing with these states. Are they trying to repeat them overly often and things like that? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so what is your thought on that then? In terms of, I think I could guess that your idea would be to record all of this data and present it all openly and truthfully. But I'm actually a little interested in your thought on that sort of criticism, because for me it seems like there's a body of other work out there on addiction with these compounds that can be referenced in this case. So again, I wonder if this is maybe, I don't want to say overly critical, but I'm just wondering where this decision comes from, because there's a lot of compounds that have similar things, and I don't know that they've necessarily been scrutinized in the same way. I don't know. I could be wrong on that.
Yeah. MAPS Lycos has a double agenda. It has also a drug policy agenda. And Rick Dublin has been very outspoken about it. He wants to get rid of the current way that drugs are regulated. And doing that at the same time, maybe for a long time in the same organization, then in two organizations that are now undergoing internal changes also towards commercialization, is really a big endeavor to get a clear message over to the regulators and to the politicians. I wouldn't do it. So just as an example, maybe others can, but I couldn't. I have been, before we founded the Mind Foundation here in Europe, we did a lot of work in drug policy and prevention in another organization called Finder. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And we agreed to kind of stop that. Of course, I talk about drug policy if somebody asks me, but it's not that we are pushing it out into the world, because we need to focus on one thing first. That was our opinion. So this is a challenge that MAPS built itself for itself, and it might now come back to as a problem that wasn't fully solved. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people seem to be concerned in the regulator space, also people who are not really deep into the science of psychedelics. That was obviously some very coherent reaction from the field, that there are some people who were in that committee who have never really looked deeply into the delicacies of psychedelic research, unblinding and so on. But nevertheless, this is exactly the kind of people we need to convince. Yeah. So, having that double message of let's get all the drugs free and let's have a therapy be approved on the market, that was a challenge.